Hi everybody, welcome back to the history of video gaming. My name is Wes and I am here with Ben. How are you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing great. How are you, Wes?
I'm doing pretty good. It's good to be back here. We're a little peek behind the curtain recording after Thanksgiving, so just had some nice break. Ready/not ready to get back
turkey.
into it. Had some nice turkey. I mean, mainly the stuffing. I eat a tiny bit of turkey and then I'm like, yeah, okay, but like stuffing and mashed potatoes are where it's really at.
Yeah, no, I get that.
But on this, right after Thanksgiving, when you had a couple days off, do you want to start us off with what you've been playing recently?
Yeah, so me and you have been playing a little bit of StarCraft together. I've been playing a little bit in my spare time. And just like enjoying it again, loving it, getting back into the competitive a little bit, trying to get a little bit better. Last night I played a little bit and I lost like 2 games at the beginning, but then I won like 5 straight and I was like, okay, I'll take that and not push my luck.
Right, yeah.
So that's good. I moved into Platinum 1, so the closest you can get to Diamond, basically.
Nice.
So, yeah, pretty cool. But I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about CitizenCon happened like last week.
Oh, that's right.
Did you see any of that?
No, I haven't been following it because I feel like when I'm most excited about the game is when like I stop paying attention and then I jump back in and there's just like 50 new things that I didn't know about,
Yeah.
I need to watch stuff about the Karak because that was one of my favorite ships and they're finally doing stuff with it.
It's going to be out, I think, in a couple months.
Oh,
so yeah, it's actually, I think, just a very solid ship, honestly. It's a long-range exploring kind of ship with like a 4 to 5 person crew, I want to say.
Yeah.
And it's got like a little bit of everything you need. Like it's got like 4 turrets, I want to say. It's got a fair bit of cargo. It's got like a little schooner thing inside, so like a little ship inside the ship.
Ooh, it does?
Yeah.
Damn,
it has a med bay, like just like kind of everything you need without being like too much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like you're flying
like not too expensive or anything.
The Javelin or whatever. That's why I liked it when I was first just looking at the specs for it. One, because it looks awesome, but also because it's like 4-person long-term exploration. So yeah, it has a little bit of everything so you can survive and all that.
Yeah, I will say, like, I think the look of it got a little bit worse, I want to say.
They probably made it bigger, right?
They did. Well, I'm trying to remember now. I forget, but they showed some like prototype images or whatever, I guess of when they first revealed it.
Right.
And since then, they've went into this whole, we've got companies and those companies look like this, you know what I mean? They've got templates and stuff. So it's from Anvil, which is a military company. So it looks a lot more military, honestly.
Okay.
A lot more kind of streamlined, dark green kind of colors. And it's not as like crazy looking as some of the prototype images, which had these like weird like spiky things, coming off and stuff.
Yeah, it had like antenna everywhere, which I kind of liked it, but
yeah, they kind of calmed that down a little bit, I'd say. So maybe it's not as interesting visually, but it's got a lot of cool gameplay elements I think would be fun.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like the perfect size, honestly.
Yeah. We'll move up to that after me and you get our Cutlass.
Yeah. So they had that. The big like reveal with Microtech, which is their new planet. It's like a winter planet. I don't know how interested I am in that because I feel like some of the moons are already kind of wintry. But one of the big things they wanted to like show off is their new environmental tech. So like the planet is so cold that if you go outside in a normal suit, your guy will like walk slow and you'll get like the freeze on your glasses and stuff.
Sweet.
They really want you to have multiple suits so that you've got a suit specifically designed for freezing temperatures and you have to put that on to go outside and move normally.
I'm down with that.
So, yeah, it looked pretty cool, honestly, and it's dynamic weather, so sometimes it's calm and you can maybe go out in a normal suit, and another time a snowstorm hits and it's hard to see, stuff like that. So
this game,
cool.
If it ever releases, is going to be the most complex game.
Well, here's the thing, Wes. I want to talk to you about this real quick. The most exciting thing to me I saw was the prison system. Now, I didn't know anything about that previously, but they're doing a lot of really cool things with it. I think it all kind of comes down to how you like serve your time, because in a lot of games it might be like you kill someone, you go in jail for 30 minutes and you're just sitting in there, right?
Right.
And you try to escape or whatever. But on this one, it actually uses a currency. So instead of like you're in there for 30 minutes, it's more you have to pay 30 what are called merits to get out, and you might get one every minute just for being in. But because it's a currency, you can trade that with other players. You can gamble it away in games. You can, go to the mines and mine and get double merits per hour or whatever. And I just feel like there's so many interesting things with that. I mean, you could have a person in your guild just sitting in prison getting merits so that if someone goes in, they can, quickly trade into them, hop out,
Yeah, that's crazy.
There's also going to be specific mission givers that can only be found in prison. So there's a reason to go in there, which I think is very interesting as well. And, for some of the missions in prison, they might reward you with merits as a reward, which is interesting. So it's like one of the most complicated prison systems, I think, ever.
Yeah.
Because normally that's such a small part of video games, but...
Well, it makes sense that they don't want to make it like just punitive in the sense that like, you kill somebody in Elder Scrolls Oblivion, you go to jail and your stats decrease, whereas this, it's like, okay, you want to be a criminal, that's one of the viable gameplay options. Mm-hmm. So like, here's this whole gameplay route you can take if you're a criminal. That's insane.
Like you can even like smuggle stuff in and out of prison. I mean, it seems like pretty crazy, honestly. So they had a panel on that. I don't know when it's coming. They're working on it, obviously, but it's probably 6 months out. I don't know.
Right.
But that I thought was the most interesting thing. So that's what I've been doing. What have you been doing, Wes?
Well, after this, I guess I'm going to watch a bunch of Star Citizen videos. I do want to say there's plenty of people who are critical of Star Citizen. Me and Ben, although we understand it has its problems, we aren't those people. We both love Star Citizen. So just a primer in case anyone's listening to this who got a bad taste in their mouth from the fact that it's been in development for years and years. Yeah.
They like the Karak or whatever was announced like 5 years ago, and they're like, it's a little late, but it's here.
Right. Finally the Karak's there. But I'm fine with it, man. It's beautiful. Yeah. I paid however much, like $40, and I have the game if it ever comes out, so I'm happy. Yeah. But so what I've been doing, I don't want to cover it too much because it actually goes into what I'm going to be talking about during our special topic today a little bit, is I re-downloaded and started playing Subnautica again.
Okay.
And that is part of the reason I was excited for it is because of the topic we're doing today. So I was like, I need to play that so I can talk about it a little better for the topic. And it's just such a good game. Like I forgot how good it was, and part of it's this weird thing where I think I like it so much because I didn't follow the development process in a weird way. Mm-hmm. Like you could play it in alpha for such a long time, but the way that I play the game, at least, like the just surprise and the sense of awe that you get from all the stuff in the game is like crazy. So playing the release version was definitely like an awesome experience for me.
I'll never forget watching it was like a Twitch highlight or something, but a guy was like sitting on like an island, and he's like, wouldn't it be really cool if like just a random creature just like popped up out of the water? Like they should add that to the game. And as he's talking, this random like creature pops up out of the water, like spirit animal thing, and like talks to him, and he's just looking there like, what is going on? I feel like it's so like there's a lot of hidden stuff in there that could be really fun to explore.
Yeah, and there's also just like this big storyline, which I didn't expect, because the whole time I was following just kind of in the corner of my eye, I guess, like following the development process. I was like, oh, it's like Minecraft, but underwater, like just a survival game. And it is. So there's like base building and stuff like that, but it's also like semi-horror game and has like a story to it. I love it. I didn't think I'd be as much of a fanboy for it, but once I started playing it, I was like, this is a really good game. So yeah. I've been binge playing that the past 2 days.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, but I think that's about it.
Yeah, let's move into our special topic. We got a special one this week because it is our 25th episode. We've gotten there, Wes. Can you believe it? 25 already.
That's crazy. That's 25 weeks. That's almost
I know.
half a year.
I'm not going to get that time back now. No, it's been fun. We've covered a lot of games, and honestly, I'm like still excited about it. So that's probably a good sign. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're still excited to be doing it. Still having fun as we do it. So that's always a good sign.
Yeah. So for our special topic this week, we wanted to kind of do something a little bit different. And Wes recommended maybe talking about some games that we think are 10 out of 10 games, at least in some aspect, which is a great topic. And, you know, we haven't gone through many 10 out of 10 games. I think one or two games maybe have been 10 out of 10, like relevance or something that we've done.
Right. And for the early games, that kind of makes sense. Like,
yeah,
they're going to be probably Pong. We gave 10 out of 10 relevance, you know, but they're not going to have the best graphics in the world.
Right. So this is taking from all of history. I mean, generally, you know, games that we've played ourselves, obviously, that we love and think are 10 out of 10. So why don't I go first, Wes? I'll start with the most obvious one for me, and then you can talk about your obvious one. But
okay,
for me, it's gotta be StarCraft 2, right?
Of course,
that's a 10 out of 10. I mean, it is the best RTS game ever made, and it's the one that I judge all other RTS upon, and all other RTS are not as good. So yeah, I mean, it's just a phenomenal game. In terms of its gameplay, I really can't think of how I would make it better. I know like pros have their opinions and stuff, but honestly, if it never changed from its current playing style and stats and stuff, I could still play it 10 years from now and have a good time. I think everything about it, even, the music's good, the campaign's great. There's like a good amount of difficulty versus AI. There's a competitive scene. There's good music. I mean, even the graphics, they're kind of simplistic, but I feel like if you would make them more 3D-ish or realistic, it'd be harder to look at the screen and know what's going on very quickly. So right. It's like the perfect little game, I think, for me. I don't know. It's a 10 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
The obvious one.
That absolutely makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's such a good game. And of course, that's its problems, but like for the amount of time you put into it, you're like, yeah, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. Mm-hmm. So do you want me to go into my obvious one?
Yeah, why don't you do your, like, you kind of hinted at it already, but...
Yes. So what made me think about this subject is I was, even though I still haven't beat Subnautica, the game that I was just playing, when we started this, I feel like a couple episodes into our podcast, I started thinking about like, and what would I rate as a 10 out of 10 for something? And I just remembered the sound in Subnautica being like the tippy top of what I want for sounds in a game. So that's what made me come up with this idea. And it's hard to, in a game like this that I really like, talk about one isolated aspect, because of course it's the sound combined with the visuals and the sound combined with how you play the game that really make it special. But the way that sound works in this game, where it can be scary, and since you're underwater the whole time and you basically have like 360 degrees around you that anything could come and attack you, learning the sounds of all the different creatures and like how far away it is based on sound, and how well they did that, because you can really like, you hear these terrifying things called Reaper Leviathans out in the distance, and you're like, okay, I don't want to go anywhere near there because they can like one-shot me.
Yeah.
And the fact that each creature has like 4 or 5, some of them probably a ton more distinct sounds that they play based on like what position you are near them. And also the fact that everything's underwater and they do a good job of differentiating like the underwater sort of dissipated echoing sound effect. Mm-hmm. And when you go inside the little bases that you make underwater, everything like gets like real sterile and like sounds like I don't know, just the way that they do it. They did a fantastic job. I don't know if it's based on the engine they were using or what, but it's like puts you in that world so much. And since it is an alien planet, everything just sounds so strange, and it's awesome because they're so terrifying, weird sounds, or you hear like a familiar sound and you're like, oh, that means I'm near a safe area because there's this big booming bassy echo of the reefback Leviathan, which is like this big friendly guy. So
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Cool.
it's just the way sound plays into this game is like part of what makes it super good for me.
Hmm. Nice. So Subnautica 10 out of 10 sound design. That totally makes sense. It's very different from the way I tackled sound because my 10 out of 10 game for sound, I went basically purely music,
Right, yeah.
which is probably because of my background,
That's
honestly.
true. Yeah, although I'm sure I could think of a couple. This is the one that jumped out to me, but music definitely plays a huge part in setting tone and a bunch of other stuff as well.
Yeah. So for me, for sound, I I want to do a quick honorable mention to Metro because I have taken some songs from that soundtrack for the podcast, and every single one that I take from it, I'm just like, this is a phenomenal song.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they do such a great job of setting that mood of like dark and dreary. It's so good. So I think that's a 10 out of 10 as well. But the one I really want to talk about is actually Age of Mythology. I didn't
Oh, yeah, yeah. I feel like I kind of saw that coming.
I know. I didn't really think about that too much, but I just posted a video of me playing through some tracks this past week, and one of them was the Age of Mythology track. I forget what episode it was in, but I kind of was reminded of that, and I went through the soundtrack again, and like every single song's a banger, dude. Like it's so good. Every single one, even the like calmer ones, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm digging this. And since I had a chance to actually perform it and transcribe it, so I kind of wrote it down, I can like see what the composer was thinking when they wrote the song. And even from a compositional perspective, like they're just really well written and really unique and original. So I love how too there's like in the game you've got Atlanteans, I think Greeks and Egyptians, and like those different themes between the different nations and stuff. And in the expansion you've got Norse, like you've got a very exotic kind of palette to the soundtrack that I just love. So it's not only very nostalgic and memorable and the songs are well written, but I can also appreciate it from this musical perspective. And maybe that's why it's a 10 out of 10 for me now that I've like played it myself. So
Right, yeah.
I love that one.
That makes a lot of sense. And because since you had the opportunity to look at it from all angles, not as just somebody who's appreciating while playing the game, but also as like you said, appreciating the composition of it by getting to play it. That's really cool.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me almost like RuneScape because both of those games, as soon as you launch it, you're like back in like immediately. You're like, oh my god, I'm getting so nostalgic just from hearing the music in the menu. You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
They drag you in so much. But unlike RuneScape, which only has a couple good tracks, I would say, at the beginning, this one it's like every single part of the game that you're in, the music is like perfect. So yeah, that's a 10 out of 10 for me.
Very cool. Well, I guess since you already mentioned gameplay, then I could get into. I actually picked a 10 out of 10 for gameplay as well. And this is one that I didn't. I just kind of scrolled through my Steam list because I wasn't thinking of something off the top of my head, but then I saw FTL, Faster Than Light, and I was like, that is something that I always had fun playing whenever I played it. And I think it's kind of pretty well known too, at least in like the roguelike or PC community. It's just like a super solid game that's really fun to play. And even though it's something I'm not good at, just I love the way that the game plays. I still haven't beat it, which is saying something. I mean, it's a hard game. I don't know if it's that hard, but it's ridiculous. But I think the way that they execute the roguelike formula of like doing runs, unlocking progress, and then getting to do different runs is like really good with the different crew races and the different types of ships that you can unlock. And I think there's a good amount of RNG, but not enough to really make it not fun to play. And a lot of cool scenarios too. That one of my favorite parts was, like you pick a ship from this race, so this encounter, which you may have seen like 20 times before, you now have a special option because you happen to have this type of equipment or something like that. And just the way that you could really tailor your run and get a completely different experience just by like what you did in the previous run and what you unlocked. And also, of course, just like the crew management of it. I really like that you could pause the game, which is a nice little gameplay feature. So I had time to make decisions about where I wanted to shoot and which one of their systems I wanted to take out. And also the fact that your crew levels up, so you have some emotional weight to it. There's just so much variety in how you play it, and I think it's just all so well executed. explain it super well, but I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, it's definitely a 10 out of 10. And I'm a cheat like you a little bit and do an honorable mention. The other one I was looking at when I saw this is the XCOM reboot, XCOM Enemy Unknown.
I still need to get that.
Yeah,
It's like on my to-do list.
And it's really good. Or I don't mean the sequel. I mean the original one. I just mean the newer original.
Oh, you mean XCOM like one, the
The first one. Yeah.
Oh, I see. I have that one. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, because that's, of course, the RNG sucks in that, but that's also a really good game.
Yeah. I'm kind of so FTL. I was like, okay, that's definitely a West type of game. Very roguelike. I know you love those. I'm a little surprised you didn't pick Binding of Isaac instead of that one.
I was thinking about it.
What do you think between those two? Why'd you pick FTL? You think I bet it has to do with space.
It does. Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't really affect the gameplay because I think if you're talking about just straight gameplay, Binding of Isaac's got so much going for it and does roguelike so well that might be the better one as far as like just gameplay. I just like the aesthetic a lot more of FTL because
it's got more going on.
Yeah, and Binding of Isaac's super weird, which is also part of what makes it so unique. But yeah, as I was writing this up, I'm like, ooh, shoot, I'm talking about 10 out of 10 gameplay for a roguelike, and I'm not talking about Isaac.
That's just I think it's what most people would go to, but it definitely doesn't mean FTL isn't a 10 out of 10 too. They're both very, very good.
Yeah.
So let's move on to my last one here. I did graphics. Now this is the caveat one because I feel like it's hard because we're rating things with today's standards, and today's standards are always getting better. So unless I'm like picking something that was released yesterday, it's probably not the best looking game anymore. But
right,
I think the game I picked is not only a very, very good looking game, but it's very memorable and it has something that's timeless about it. So I think that's going to go with both of us. But that's kind of why it's a 10 out of 10. So for mine, I don't think you're going to get this, Wes, but I picked Sleeping Dogs. Do you remember this game at all?
Yeah, I do, but that definitely surprised me.
Yes, this game is so good looking. When I was thinking about it, I was like, what games like are the best looking games? And it as soon as I thought about it for a little bit, I was like, you know what? Sleeping Dogs looks so freaking good. Not only graphically is it just beautiful, like one of the first things I remember about it are the reflections, like when it rains and stuff. It's like so good looking. It looks like a racing game because it partly is a racing game. So, I mean, everything. It's open world, so you've got like this big world to explore, and every corner of it feels unique and fleshed out. And the thing that really makes it 10 out of 10 is driving at night. You're in Hong Kong or Tokyo or something, I forget. But there's lots of like neon lights and stuff. So it's just a very colorful world and it feels very lived in. The aesthetic is just incredibly pleasing with the Asian art style and with the great just visual 3D graphics as well. I mean, it's probably the most fun map to drive around in than any that I've played. Like even like Need for Speed games, I would rather play this almost. So yeah, it's just like the best, Tokyo, driving through Tokyo. It feels like Fast and the Furious Tokyo, or whatever. Tokyo Drift, but
yeah.
But the game, so it just feels really, really cool and just had such a pleasing environment to drive around. It felt so wonderful just being in that world. So for me, that's a 10 out of 10.
And I do remember you played that while we were roommates in college. I remember looking over your shoulder being like, damn, that's a really cool aesthetic. Like they nail it.
Yeah, they did. And I was playing on like a potato, so that also tells you something.
So should I go ahead with my last one then?
Yeah, let's do it, Wes. I have no idea what your last one's going to be.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if I gave it away because it's going to be a little hard right now when we're rating games, and of course giving a caveat too, like Ben said. Right now when we're rating games from 75, it's all like, are the graphics better? Like, just straight up. What I went for with mine was one that I just felt artistically is amazing. And you'll probably notice as soon as I say it, Ben, but I picked Darkest Dungeon for 10 out of 10 for graphics.
Okay, I like it.
Because it's not like super high-end GPU or stress testing your system kind of good graphics, but the art style and just how it's executed in the game, like the really heavy-handed kind of comic book, heavy lines drawn style, wouldn't look good, or I don't think would look good in like this beautifully rendered 3D environment. But the way that they do their 2D figures, and even though they're like barely animated, it just complements the somber atmosphere of the game so well. And
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff this game has going for it. It's like the voice acting, the dude with the super gravelly voice is incredible, and the gameplay, of course, is great. But I think the art kind of ties it all together. I'm sure there's lots of other stuff out there like it now, but when I played it, I was just like, this is so different looking and feeling than anything I've ever played before.
It's a good call. It perfectly matches the aesthetic of the story and the gameplay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And yeah, artistically, I think it's a 10 out of 10 for graphics. I was trying to think if there's more I can say about it, but I'm just kind of like, I still think it's beautiful every time I boot it up and play it.
good. Yeah, well, I hope you guys enjoyed that, our special 25th. There is one other game I want to quickly mention. The best ever story that I played is Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. I don't want to give this away because the game's only like 6 hours long, so just go out and buy it. But yeah, that game made me cry, so I should probably mention it.
Yeah. Still need to work up the emotional energy to play that game.
Yeah, it's you need to actually play it, by the way. You cannot watch somebody else play it. You will not get the experience. So just do it, like it's worth it. So I just want to say that. So I think without further ado, let's move into the timeline. We do have a full episode today, so let's get right into it.
Let's get into it.
All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that music. This time, for the 25th episode, I decided to go back and redo the song that we'd had on the very first episode, which was from Castlevania. So I hope you like that this time with a little bit more instruments, a little bit more fleshed out. So yeah, let's move in right to the games, though. We've got quite a few here, quite a few good ones as well. We're going to start off with Outlaw by Atari, which came out in March of 1976. This was a light gun game based on quick drawing your gun from the cabinet, which sounds awesome. So the gun's like in its holster in the cabinet, and I guess you have to wait for something to pop up on screen. You grab it from the cabinet and shoot.
Oh, cool.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find any like video or emulation on that, so I couldn't review it in full. But the next one I could review in full, and that one is called Seawolf by Midway, which I think, Wes, maybe you mentioned this previously, but I got the chance to review it, and this is a very interesting one for many reasons. Let me just talk a little bit about the cabinet. I read a couple people actually say like this is one of the best looking cabinets like ever made, and it's definitely a good looking cabinet, but I wouldn't say it's that like amazing. Basically, you've got on the sides kind of like a hand-drawn aesthetic of like underwater, a submarine on the sides, like, you know, the seabed, some like coral, like it's very like nice looking, but it's kind of just a drawn graphic. So you know, it's not a big Jaws head like a Maneater. So I don't know if I would say it's like absolutely incredible, but it's definitely a good looking cabinet.
And I think it does carry a lot of nostalgia with it too, so I'm sure that's part of it, because I think this, well, maybe you'll get into it, but I think this was a pretty popular one.
Yeah, I think the reason it was popular actually is because of the peripheral that it used. And this cabinet used a periscope peripheral, which was pretty big and very prominent on the cabinet. So I think a combination with good art on the sides and this gigantic periscope looking thing probably helped make this game like one of the ones everyone was like, oh, I need to go check that out, you know? Getting into how the game worked exactly, the peripheral is actually a pretty important and key part of how you played this game, because you would look in the periscope, which is like the, I don't know, telescope thing on like submarines, right?
That's a yeah. I think it's you got it right.
Yeah, so you know, but basically you look in there, and what's interesting about it is this game is partly a digital video game, and it's also partly electromechanical. So there's some electromechanical pieces to this, but essentially you look through the periscope, you've got a reticle there, which is part of the peripheral. And then when you move the periscope left to right to look around, that's actually how you're aiming. So you're aiming by moving the periscope, and there's a fire button on one of the handles of the periscope. So the gameplay is there's a bunch of ships on the screen. They're going left to right. There's also some mines that you don't want to hit, but there's no real penalty if you hit them. But you're trying to torpedo some ships while aiming using your periscope, which is kind of cool. I think it's a interesting way to do it. It was actually based off of an older game called Periscope by Sega. So, and that, I believe that one was also fairly popular, which that one was electromechanical. I think we did mention it, but this is sort of the next evolution of it. So getting in a little bit further into my ratings and into the gameplay. So how fun was it to actually shoot and torpedo things down? I don't know if it was that fun, honestly. Like, there is some skill to the torpedo. It kind of moves funny, where there's a horizon line where most of the ships are at, or at least the biggest ships. And the closer the torpedo gets to the horizon line, the slower it moves. So it kind of gives the illusion that it's going for a lot further of a distance than it appears kind of naturally. I mean, it's 2D, so it kind of tried to give the illusion of distance that way, but it made the torpedo move kind of slower the further out it got from where you fired it. So because of that, there is some sort of skill in learning how to shoot this thing and trying to shoot down ships, which is cool. That part's cool, but that's kind of all the game is. It's just shooting down ships floating on the ocean. There's a couple different ship shapes. There are these mines that kind of appear and move along the water, but the game is time-based, so you're really just losing score if you hit them. So it's not really like that big of a deal, I don't think, if you hit one or two.
Right.
You can also fire multiple torpedoes at once. I think you can fire 5, and then you have to reload for a second. So, you know, if you just fire like 2 at a time, you know, hopefully one might hit the mine, the other one might go through and hit the ship. So it's not that big of a gameplay issue. But that's kind of it for the gameplay. It's kind of simplistic and one-dimensional in my opinion, but I think because of things like the periscope and making that aiming, you know, with the periscope peripheral happen, it kind of bumps it up a little bit in my opinion. So I gave it a 2.5 out of 10 for gameplay. You know, it's simple, but there is some skill there, and the use of that peripheral really makes it unique and different from anything else around. So otherwise, it would just be kind of like a reverse Drop Zone 4, which I think we mentioned previously.
Right, yeah, just kind of upside down.
Yeah, so that was the gameplay. For graphics, though, this one was also very difficult for me to think about, because part of this game is electromechanical. So when you shoot a ship down, for instance, it does have a little, you know, sprite that comes up that looks like a ship, you know, like got hit in half or something, you know, when you hit it. But then there's also this red explosion that comes up, and that part's electromechanical. It's like a light that comes
weird.
up close to the ship. You also have a counter that shows you how many torpedoes you have until you have to reload, and then if you're reloading, but those are all electromechanical lights as well. I'm not sure if that was inside of the periscope peripheral or if that was actually like in the screen or above the screen rather. But yeah, so it's kind of hard to rate this because the video game part is not doing all the work.
Right, yeah.
Like the reticle is on the periscope, so that's not a video component. I think there's also a blue overlay on the periscope, so people looking from the sides are seeing this black and white TV image, but if you're looking in the periscope, it's like got a blue hint to all the colors. So it's kind of hard to rate, but I gave it 2.5 out of 10. I think it's really more like a 2 game, but then having, the overlays and having the nice cabinet art and the peripheral, I was like, you know what? That kind of bumped it up a little bit, in my opinion.
Right.
And for sound, this is another one that's hard because, again, there's some electromechanical sounds. There's like it's not a firing, it's more like an alarm, like that the sub's like under fire or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like red alert, or I don't know what you'd call it, but siren.
Yeah. Some sort of siren sound, that's electromechanical. There is a nice sound that happens when you hit something, and that's like really boomy and bassy, and I think it's part of the video game, so that's really nice. You also get this really, really nice, when you fire a torpedo, before it hits anything, you get a nice like whoosh sound as it leaves the submarine.
Oh, cool.
Which is actually really, really cool. So I gave sound 2.5 out of 10. I kind of included some of those electromechanical sounds in there, but all together, it's a pretty nice experience. I wish there was music, obviously, but that's kind of still a bit far out for some of these games. But as far as like what sound you need to make it work, I do think they got all that they needed and maybe even a little bit more. So 2.5 out of 10 is right there. And then for relevance, I gave 7 out of 10. I wanted to go kind of high because this is a very memorable one. A lot of people remember this. My parents, your parents, both remember this game. I think the periscope was the main reason of that. I don't think the gameplay was.
Right.
But it is a very memorable one, and I think probably influenced there being submarine games over the course of the next few years, which I know for a fact there is. So I think that is a big part of it. So I wanted to give it kind of a higher relevance in that. And altogether, I didn't add these up. I gave it 3.5 out of 10, Wes.
There you go.
So, yeah, so it's a very solid game. I think it's kind of a simplistic gameplay loop, but it has all these extra bells and whistles on that really make it kind of unique and fun and interesting. So I think without those bells and whistles, it's kind of forgettable, but it had a lot of extra stuff that it didn't need that really kind of bumped it up, in my opinion, in a lot of the scores. So yeah, that's Seawolf by Midway. Quite an interesting one. Very unique. It's very hard to rate because of all the electromechanical pieces and all the peripherals and stuff. But
after hearing about it from my mom and dad, I think they both had played it. Yeah, I'm surprised by how much of that has electromechanical elements to it. I didn't realize. I thought it was pretty much all just video games. So yeah, I could see how that would make it kind of difficult, but also definitely make it stand out against all the other cabinets that were around at the time.
Yeah, and also with the video game part, it was only like 2 torpedoes, or like however many torpedoes. You could fire more than one at a time, but you kind of had to like plan and aim pretty well, so there's no real point in that. So, but you could fire the torpedoes multiple at a time, and on the screen it was just that, the ships, the horizontal skyline, the mines, and a timer and a score at the bottom, and that's it. So everything else was electromechanical, including the explosions, the keeping track of how many torpedoes you had left to reload, the crosshair. I mean, that was all electromechanical or part of a peripheral of some kind. So it's very interesting, the overlay, the blue overlay. So it's interesting that how they combine the two, for sure, which I thought was very unique. But let's move on from that, unless you have anything else you wanted to mention there.
I was just going to say, yeah, I could see why that makes it hard to review, but definitely an interesting one. But yeah, so we can move right on then into our next game on the list, which is an honorable mention. This one is called Pinball by Diversified Entertainment, and it came out in March of '76. This was just a clone of TV Pinball by Exidy, and we don't really have much info on it. The company also released a Pong clone called Tennis around the same time, so not too much going on there. Yeah, but something ever so exciting, and by that I mean it's not really that exciting. The next game that I actually got to cover was one from our Creative Computing March-April issue, and this was a computer conversion of the board game MasterMind, which I feel like I've heard of before, but I actually didn't know anything about it until I started looking into this. So this, in Creative Computing, was made by a guy named David Strubble, The board game itself was made back in around 1971 by a guy named Mordecai Marovich, which I can barely say, but it's a very cool German name, I think. And reportedly in the Christmas season of 1975, MasterMind was actually the best-selling packaged game, and it outsold Monopoly.
Whoa.
So, I mean, that's saying something. And this was just we couldn't verify another source. We just found this in the Creative Computing edition, but still, I mean, even if it was close to selling to Monopoly in 75, that means it was a pretty popular game.
Mm-hmm.
And so the board game itself was marketed as a code-breaking game for 2 players, where each player takes turns being the code breaker and the code maker. And I was all excited until I was reading further into the Creative Computing notes and saw that the editor for Creative Computing said it's basically bulls and cows, or also bulls and cleots, except using colors instead of words or numbers. So that got my excitement curbed pretty quickly. Being a little too harsh. So let me get into what the gameplay is for this. I'm going to explain the board game first because I think that kind of helps understand how it was translated into a computer game.
Okay.
So at the start of the game, one player is the code maker and the other one's the code breaker. The person who makes the code picks a sequence of basically 4 colors. They're displayed on the board from left to right, so that's the sequence, and you have a total of 6 different colors that you can pick to make that sequence of 4. And you're allowed to repeat colors in the code too. I'm not sure how many times. I think only 2. So like you could only have like 2 greens or 2 blues, but not 3 greens as far as I know. You might have been able to have more than that though. I'm not too sure. And basically the person who's trying to break the code that the code maker made has 10 turns to guess the sequence. And after each guess, the person who made the code provides a white peg for every color that is correct, but not in the right place, or a bowl, I think, and a black peg for every color that is in, or it's the right color and it's in the correct place, which I think would be a cleot, or maybe the other way around. But so that's where the main gameplay of this lies and why it's similar to bulls and cows, or it's basically bulls and cows except using colors. And this might be way too specific, but if anyone's wondering this, and I was, so I wrote myself a little diagram almost to describe it so I didn't forget. Let's say the code is GBPY for green, blue, purple, yellow, and someone guesses red, orange, green, green. You don't get 2 white pegs because you guessed 2 greens, but both of them are in the wrong position. You only get 1 white peg for the first green, which confuses the heck out of me.
That sounds weird.
And it's probably even more confusing explaining, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but it was just, it actually, when you're playing the game, makes it easier for you to guess the sequence. But I was super confused when I was reading the rules. I'm like, wait, but couldn't you just do all this? And then I figured out later that you can't do that. So now that tangent's over, the code maker basically gets points for how many turns it takes the code breaker to guess the code. And if they don't guess in 10 turns, then the code maker gets all 10 points. And then the players switch roles, and you keep playing for however many rounds you feel like going to, or whoever reaches a certain amount of points first. So the code breaker doesn't get any points until they play as the code maker. Now, that's the board game version of it. The computer version that this guy made is you're only able to play as the code breaker, and the computer always makes the code. And there's no visuals to it, but you can type a command board to see what the previous guesses were and what pegs the computer gave you, whether it was a white or black peg, and how many for all of the previous turns. And it's interesting that it's kind of a limitation that you can't play as both roles and the computer can't do both roles. And the creator kind of noted that because they said at the very end of their description that if anyone had a suggestion of how they could make the computer the code breaker role, that they wanted to hear it. So I did like seeing that, these were like the newsletters for the coding community and that it's very interactive. So who knows, in one of the next issues, whether we'll cover it or not, we might finally get a version of MasterMind that actually has the computer being able to play both roles. So getting into my ratings for it, it's going to be a little rough, but...
Did this remind you a lot of Bulls and Cleats, or does it feel different at all?
It reminded me a lot of Bulls and Cleats, especially once I was looking at the text version.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's because maybe this had the board game associated with it, but I do kind of like this one more. Mm-hmm. Like it feels like it has a little bit more character. And maybe it's a little bit easier for my brain to think of colors in a sequence instead of just like the letters in a word, which could be just like random letters run together in the case of Bulls and Cleots. But
right. It's just interesting to me that Bulls and Cleots came out first, and then like a couple years later, MasterMind's like the #1 game like that Christmas or whatever. And I'm like,
I know, yeah.
Aren't they sick of this, or haven't they seen this before?
Well, it's funny too, in the Creative Computing magazine, or maybe it was in the history of MasterMind that I was reading it, but the person was saying, yeah, and Bulls and Cleots is, really popular in the UK, but it never caught on in America.
Really? That's
Yeah.
so weird.
And I don't know why, but apparently this one was popular in America.
We can't read.
Yeah, basically. They give us colors and we're
That's
like,
fine.
yeah, we can play this.
Yeah.
So for the graphics, it's 0 out of 10. It's just text. There's no like ASCII characters. When you hit the board command to see what the board looks like, it's just a list of numbers. So it's not really like it's trying to illustrate the board for you.
Wait, it uses numbers and not letters or something? Wait, how does it show the colors?
So it does use letters for the colors,
Oh, okay.
but then it has like, it's a table basically. And it has like what you input, which would be like RGYO or something like that. And then it says black and then a number under it, and white and a number under it to how many of each color peg you got basically. So it's not really an illustration. For sound, also 0 out of 10 because there's nothing there. And for gameplay, I went back to my Bulls and Cleots review to make sure I rated this one slightly better. So that was a 1 out of 10. This one is a 1.5 out of 10 for gameplay. I don't know.
You're like, no, I'm not going to give it the full point.
not going to give it the full point. I didn't give it a 0.25, so at least it's a little better than that.
Yeah.
But I do think the gameplay in this is a little bit better. I think part of it's just because it's more kind of recognizable and manageable for me, at least, when I'm just dealing with like those 6 colors and not just like a sequence of numbers or a word. And also I think it's a little bit easier to kind of visualize and guess the number or the sequence when it's colors. And even though I don't really like the logic guessing game kind of thing, I do think that this being based on a board game also gives it a little bit of an edge because it has some theming with it. Like in the board game, your secret agent's trying to solve the code. And just the visual aspect of it makes this seem a little bit better, which kind of helps in the gameplay side of it because, I don't know, just like Bulls and Cleots, I didn't have anything to associate it with it to like keep me wanting to play it, if that makes any sense. Whereas this is like, okay, it's that cool board game and this person's effort at making that game. So I did enjoy the gameplay for that a little bit more. And also I do appreciate that they programmed the board command in there, even if it's not super visually pleasing, so that at least I didn't have to remember everything I guessed. And so for relevance for this, I gave it a 3 out of 10. I described it as sort of being backwards relevant, if that makes any sense, because I think we've seen a trend of people being excited about a board game or like a media property and wanting to make a computer game out of it, whether it's like Jaws for the arcade cabinets or D&D or Star Trek. And so I really appreciate seeing someone saying like, hey, this is a really cool, popular board game that people like. Can I make it into a computer game? So I think it's relevant in that sense of like continuing the trend of people always wanting to make what they see in the world in a different kind of game into a video game, basically. And overall, I gave it a 1.5 out of 10. It's not really something I would go back and play. Do think the board game version would be pretty fun with friends, but the limitation of not being able to play both sides of it kind of ruins it for me for this one. But I do like seeing attempts of people trying to make board games into video games, and I think it does help that this kind of has the MasterMind board game name backing it up to make this a slightly more interesting game than the dreaded Bulls and Cleots.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
Yeah.
I thought that would be a good one to give you because not only have you already played Bulls and Cleots, but it did have some out of video gaming industry relevance, just to like normal people.
Right. Yeah. It has appeal for people who are just playing the board games and haven't touched any video games yet.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Let's keep moving down the list, though. We've got 2 more games here by Creative Computing. The first one's called Deep Space by Bill Cotter, who we've seen before. He's I guess a common editor in this newsletter. But Deep Space, basically, it looks like a spin-off of Trek 3 or something. That style of gameplay anyway, but I couldn't get it to run or anything, so I'm not 100% sure. But it's, kind of another Star Trek clone. I don't think it did anything that new or interesting compared to something as complex as Super Star Trek that we've covered before. So,
right. And next up, we have the last one that we're covering from Creative Computing today, and that is called either Bob's Tones or Bob Stones. No idea. It's all one word. And that was by, is it Don Adelman who did that?
Yeah, I think so.
This was basically just a number guessing game with, didn't really seem like it had much strategy to it. Not too much going on there.
Yeah, so we really didn't want to spend much time on that one. But let's move into the other magazine. We've got People's Computer Company March, April issue now. And this one, I picked a game to review. This one's called Square by Matt Oglesby, who I think we've covered before. I forget which one he did.
He did Madi.
Oh, he did Madi. So, yeah, we'll see him again, I think, very shortly. But, yeah, this one, so the game's called Square, and I picked this one because I could play it physically, first of all, because I couldn't get the code working.
Right.
But it reminds me a lot of Condot, actually, and I love Condot, so I was like, you know what, this could be actually pretty good. So basically how the game works is you've got a 5x5 grid of dots. You and an opponent take turns picking a point that's on that grid, and that becomes like an active point. And basically what happens is the first person that completes a square of points, so 4 points that are either, it could be a square like normal, so like on its bottom, or it could be kind of like a diamond shape square as well. But the first person who makes a square wins the game. And what I kind of like about this is it reminds me a lot of something like Condot. It's a little bit smaller and simpler, so it's actually kind of hard to not make a square, because if you're the third line again, that leaves your opponent to be the last corner and make the square. So your job is to basically pick points and just try to avoid making a square until your opponent accidentally, gives you that chance to finish one out. So I actually kind of thought of the game more as like a game about trying to avoid making squares than making one.
Right.
Which is interesting. But it was a kind of interesting like little game. I could definitely like see myself playing this at like restaurants or something, back in the day if I had known about it. It's very simple. It kind of reminds me of tic-tac-toe or something like that. But it has a little bit more strategy. It's definitely one of those where you're playing and you like think you made a good spot, and then all of a sudden the game's over,
Right, yeah,
I didn't see that. So it kind of reminds me of like chess or something, where I'm like, what do you mean you have me in checkmate? It's like it just happens. So it's very simple, but very enjoyable. It's enjoyable because the squares that you can make can be any size. So, like the 4 closest dots together is a square, but you could also be like the 4 furthest corners of the whole map could be a square, So any square of any size can count, and that makes it so that it's hard to look at all the options and all the possibilities before you pick a point. So I'm not totally sure if this version, I think it was just you versus the computer, and the computer I think did a pretty good job of not making squares. But it could I'm not sure if this had a 2-player version, but I think it would just be more fun playing against your friends, honestly, than playing against a computer. But yeah, I thought it was a nice little interesting game. A little bit different every time, a little bit of strategy, and it's just some like good old fun, I think. So I feel like I rated this a little high. So getting into my ratings, I gave gameplay a 2 out of 10. It's just kind of solid. There's not a whole lot there, but it's a great like little mini game, and it's a good like mind puzzle, or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Brain teaser. Is that the word?
Brain teaser. That's exactly what I was looking for. Sound, I gave it 0 because it's a computer game. Graphics, I gave 1.5 out of 10. I wasn't as harsh as the US for my graphics. Basically, I was like, what could I possibly want this to actually show me, because it just shows the board and which dots both players picked. And that's kind of like all I think you really need. But I mean, it's not like it's good looking, but they did a good job representing the information, I thought. And then finally, for relevance, I gave it 2.5 out of 10. It's not that relevant, but I'm glad I found it because I could show this to somebody and be like, hey, this is a fun little game to play while the food's coming. So I thought it was okay.
You're going to have a whole list of those kind of games before the end of this podcast.
I'm going to be the most interesting person to go to dinner with at the end of this, Wes.
You'll be like, no. Take the food back into the kitchen. We're still finishing a game.
Well, Condot I already knew. This one I didn't know about. But it's a nice, like, little fun one, I think. So, yeah, it was cool. Overall, I gave the game a 1.5 out of 10. It's very, very simple, very standard, but it has a nice, like, little fun to it that I could see myself playing a couple games with some family members or something and us actually having a good time. So, yeah, I'm glad I found it. I'm glad I rated it. But it's not like it's breaking any barriers in terms of video gaming's history.
Right. Yeah.
Did that make sense how it described it, Wes?
Yeah. I think it did. I mean, all those types of games are starting to get a little jumbled in my brain. But yeah, I see how it's got a little bit of difference to it. And it does sound like it'd be, I'm not going to become a hardcore Square player, but a little bit of fun. Just pass the time or something like that. Mac Oglesby is making a decent bit of games like that.
Yeah, in case people are getting it confused with Condot, you draw lines between the dots, and the squares have to be the smallest type of square, like the 4 dots like really close together to connect the square total and give it a point. But in this one, it can be a square that's any size, and as long as you make a single one, you win the whole game right then and there. So it's a little different. Just gotta trust me.
High stake Condot.
Yeah, maybe. So, moving on, we got one more game here quick from People's Computer Company. This one's called Dodge 'Em by Matt Oglesby. We just saw him. He made Square. This is a game where you're moving pieces across the board from left to right, and the computer is moving their pieces from south to north. So you have to kind of block your opponent's pieces from moving while trying to move yours. It kind of reminded me a lot of that Pawn game that you played a while ago, Wes.
Right, Hex Pawn.
Hex Pawn, yeah. And because of that, I wasn't interested.
I might have saved you, Ben.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know how much strategy there is to that one, but it's there. So, moving on, this next game is probably one of the most important games of the whole year, but I kind of don't want to give it away that much right now because this version is not emulated, there's no video, so we couldn't play it, but it is going to inspire several clones that will become probably the best games of the year. So I was like, how do I talk about this? But this next game is called Nürburgring 1 by Dr. Ing, Rainer Forest. And this came out in March 76 in Germany in like a bowling alley because the guy who made it was basically like, it was like a passion project for him. He just built one for his local bowling alley or whatever. But somehow, I forget which company found it first, but one of these big American companies, like a CEO, like heard about it, like went down to the bowling alley, saw it, and he's like, I need this, Oh,
wow.
And it took a while to develop because the game was very complicated and wasn't like profitable, you know what I mean? Like it took a lot of components to run. So it took a while for them to figure out how to make it work. But eventually, everybody kind of found out about it and started copying it. But this was the original. And this is a sort of FPS racing game. And we've come across a couple racing games, but I don't think any of them have been in first person.
Not that I remember, yeah.
I'm not sure how first person this is. It could be a slightly isometric, because I believe you're looking down at a car, kind of. But it's kind of the father of all first-person racing games or isometric racing games, because up until this time, I think they've almost always been top-down, if not always. So this is the first one that does that, and we are going to hear about it later, so I'm going to be talking about it later. But just everybody know this is the one that started it all. I wish I could have played the original, but there's only a couple released,
Right.
Because this was not meant for big companies to distribute. So, yeah. just we'll come back to this. We will talk about it when we talk about those other games. So just keep that in mind.
And next up, this is going along with that. We also have in our honorable mentions here Nürburgring 2. Same thing. So this was by the original creator, and this was basically the same game as we were just talking about, but it had motorcycle handlebars and a sprite. But we can't confirm exactly when this one came out. We did see some dates that were saying it was in 1979, so take it with where it is on the timeline right now, just kind of with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Again, kind of like a prototype game, so it's kind of hard to list those.
Right.
But, I thought the gameplay is essentially the same as the first, so I was like, it's probably pretty close.
Right. Yeah, just a little more visuals. Yeah. But next up, something that I can talk a little bit more about, we have a console. And more than just that, we have an Atari console.
Oh, yeah.
So this one is Super Pong, which was the Model C 140 by Atari, and it came out in 76. And basically, the console itself looked exactly like the earlier Pong home system, the Model C 100. Its control knobs on either side of it kind of has like a brown plastic finish on it. And Sears also released a version of this one a little bit later called Sears Super Pong, which had detachable controllers, which is interesting. Whereas this one just had those two little knobs on the side. So it's weird to see. I'm kind of curious which one ended up being historically more popular, because I would prefer the controllers, but that could just be the sort of modern influence on it.
Mm-hmm.
And also later they came out with the Sears Super Pong 4, which had 4-player modes for all the games. This one just had 4 different games on it, which is more than I believe, just Pong that was on the first Atari home console. And all of the ones on this one are either 2-player or single-player. And just another interesting fact about the console itself, it actually had the option of being powered by either an AC adapter or batteries, which is weird. I feel like so far we've kind of seen one or the other for that.
Yeah.
So the main thing that makes this interesting is the gameplay and the types of games that you could play for a home console at this time. So we've seen a lot of home consoles, and this one doesn't do anything like super new or crazy, but it does do some small interesting stuff, and of course it's an Atari one, so it's pretty good. So this played 4 Pong variant games. The first one was called Catch. This one is actually new or different than any of the other Pong ones that we've seen as far as I know, and it's both players basically are the hole in the wall that we've seen in lots of hole in the wall game modes, and you're moving that hole up and down to actually catch the ball instead of deflect it onto your opponent's side of the screen. So it's almost a sort of opposite scoring method where you want to get it through your hole onto your side of the screen and off the edge to get a point.
I have seen this in other ones, but I think this is the first time Atari has taken this concept with one of theirs.
It is, okay. Yeah, sometimes it's hard with all those console games to remember what's new and what's not. The next one that they had is called Solitaire, and this was a single-player game, basically like handball or squash that we've seen on a lot of other consoles. But interestingly enough, with the second-player controls on this one, you can change how much of the screen is covered by the wall on the other side. So it's not always a solid wall that you're just hitting the ball back and forth to see how many times you can hit it, and then the opponent gets a point, or basically you lose a point whenever it goes off your side of the edge. You can actually kind of do like a one-sided basketball with this by putting the hole just at the top and then just have one person playing and trying to get it through there, and then you still get a point. But it's weird because you don't control the hole like you do in Hole in the Wall, so you can't actually put the hole in the center in this mode. It's just like this wall that only comes up from the bottom. So it's either like half the screen's covered, the whole screen's covered, or you do like free throw basketball or something. I don't know. It's
yeah.
It's interesting because the way they did it means like there's some options to that one mode. Like you could play it 2-player too, and somebody could just like be the wall, although there wouldn't be much point because you could just close the gap at any time. But who knows? I mean, it's nice that there's at least you can kind of do a couple different things with that. The third game mode on there was Pong Doubles, which is basically just, typical Pong Doubles, tennis doubles kind of game. It's weird. I'm used to playing some of the hockey ones or looking at some of the hockey ones on other consoles where the forward paddle is offset, but for this one, they're both in the same plane, the same horizontal plane, which is kind of strange. And your forward one, since it's not a soccer or a hockey game, is on your side of the court instead of being on the opponent's side of the court. So basically just typical Pong doubles. Something I did notice watching a video of this is that if your back paddle hits the ball and it goes through the back of your front paddle, it doesn't like ricochet. It just passes straight through the back, which is kind of nice. I don't really... Pong collision is a mystery to me because sometimes it can hit the top of the paddle in this game and bounce off too. So
Yeah.
it's a nice that works because I could see that screwing you a lot if it just hit the back and then went straight back into your side of the goal. And then the last one is Pong. It just also had standard Pong on it. Not too much to say about that. It's just standard Atari Pong. But getting into my ratings, this is where this system gets pretty interesting. It had really good graphics for a home system. I feel like everything looked really clear. The paddles were a little bit jittery, but I mean, that's kind of standard in some of the home consoles that we've been seeing. And the background is black, but all the sections that are normally white have like this rainbow spectrum of color going across it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it's weird. It's a weird decision, but it's awesome because of how weird it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
it's kind of trippy.
Yeah, it is kind of trippy. And in my brain, I was like, oh, this is like a cabinet overlay. But then I was thinking, wait, it shows up on your TV, so it's not a cabinet overlay. It's just the colors always stay in that section. But it has the nice sort of side effect, or maybe it was the intended effect, that the paddles and your side of the court is basically color-coded. So the left side is yellow and the right side's pink. So instead of just having these two white paddles, you can actually have like teams or sides, or I don't know. Just even that little splash of color makes a huge difference.
And I liked how it wasn't just like solid colors, because it was that spectrum. Things almost had like a fade to them or something. Like it looked a little bit nicer than just the whole thing's just like that solid pink, you know?
Right, yeah, because it's all a gradient and it's not so harsh. Like your paddle actually transitions from like yellow to starting to be green, and the pink one starts to, I think, be orange on that side. So it's really interesting. It's just like this weird idea, which I don't know if it was like really easy for them to do or what, but they just kind of threw it on a home system, and it makes it like that much more interesting compared to everything else at the time. And the boundaries at the top and the bottom, look pretty good. The dotted line dividing the center look good. And the on-screen scoring with this one is actually really cool. It's not always on the screen, but it shows up every time that a point is scored, and then it takes up like half of the screen, or like most of the screen, which I kind of like because it just like flashes, tells you to score. It's gigantic, easy to read, and then disappears, so it's not in your way for the rest of the time. And also just another side note of something I noticed that I really liked with the Spectrum kind of rainbow color scheme is that since the ball's always moving across the screen, the ball's always changing colors whenever it's bouncing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really tiny, the ball itself, so it's kind of hard to see, but I just noticed like you can notice little glimmers of it because it's passing through all the sections of the screen that it's always changing color. So I was excited about the colors, forgot to mention my rating, but I gave that a 3 out of 10 for graphics.
Nice.
Which might not seem super high compared to like some of the arcade cabinets, but for home console, I feel like that's really good.
I mean, freaking Seawolf didn't even have color.
Right, yeah. That's true. Yeah, I was thinking Western Gun. So you could argue higher for this. Really, the color's what sells it for the graphics in this console. And so going on to the sound, I just gave that a 1.5 out of 10. The sounds are good, but they're just Pong sounds. There's nothing crazy. I mean, it doesn't need to be anything crazy because it is just Pong. And also the sounds come out of the console themselves and they don't come out of your TV system. So, just pretty good. Nothing great. And gameplay is kind of same along that line. I gave it a 2 out of 10. It's a pretty simple home system. I think just because it was made by Atari, tempted to give it a little higher. But they do a pretty good job. But I was thinking about some of the other consoles that we've seen, and there are definitely other consoles that probably did some of these games better. I don't know. But it still is really solid. It looks fast, which is good. It's not like too slow. And even the weird variation on the squash practice mode, I think, is an entertaining addition because it's just like new and a little different. So it's not, super incredible gameplay, but it's a really solid 76 home console, and I think they do a really good job with it.
Yeah, for sure.
And for relevance, I gave it an 8 out of 10. A lot of that is because it's Atari. I think, though, you can't really discount just the small effect of having that rainbow color on the screen. Because you throw that in there, it seems like something simple, but it just stands out so much compared to everything else that we've seen. So I really like that, and I thought that alone gave its relevance, and I would imagine, I don't know for sure, that I would imagine that really helped grab people's eye. So people would start realizing, like, man, we got to put a color in home consoles because that's really going to draw people in. So
yeah.
It's always good to see another iteration of an Atari home console too. So I don't think this one is like super, super special. I'm sure we'll see some other Atari home consoles that are amazing, but that little bit that it does with the spectrum of color is really cool.
Yeah, it's only the second Atari console that has been released, actually. So after just Home Pong, which was just Pong, black and white, nothing else. So
yeah, so it is at least a big innovation over what Atari's done previously. They're making strides in the home console market.
And this did use a chip, by the way, just like the AY3-8500, but it was a chip that Atari had sole rights to and just used just for this console. So I forget what the serial number is, but it's,
Yeah, I looked it up.
It's a Super Pong chip.
Yeah, I didn't write it down because it's even more letters and numbers than the AY3-8500, which I can somewhat remember by now. But that is also relevant too because it means it's different than what was going on at the time, because almost everything else was an AY3-8500.
And then it also had, because it was using the chip, it had the power to do all this special stuff, including the color, which is definitely, I think, the highlight of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the on-screen scoring and the sound too, all in the same console.
So a very interesting one.
Yeah. And just to wrap it up overall, I gave it a 3 out of 10. I think it's a solid Pong console that looks pretty fun to play. And, I'd like to see more game modes, but as far as what Atari's done, this is a big innovation in that respect. And I just really like the weird rainbow thing. It's cool. It's strange. I like it. Like, even if it's not like how you show, okay, these are the best graphics that you can do on console, it's just interesting. And, they were like, hey, we could throw that in. It'd be pretty easy, or maybe it was really hard. I don't want to discount it, but it just seems like a simple way to like really spice up a home console.
I think it is the best color graphics that we've seen on a console. Because, we've seen some color graphics on a console, I think, but they've just been these very solid colors. Like the paddle is a different color and it's just a solid color. But this with the kind of fade to different colors and the rainbow effect it had, like the ball changing colors as it went. That's pretty incredible. It's
super cool. Yeah, we haven't seen anything like that for a home console.
Yeah, that's a cool one. I don't forget if you mentioned this, but it also later released as Super Pong Pro-Am C200 version, which had 2 difficulty modes. I don't know what that means. Maybe the paddle size got smaller or the ball got faster.
Yeah, I would guess one of those because that's what we've seen before.
So, yeah, they kind of had their variations on this one. We'll say at least. And that's going to move us into the last 2 games of the episode here. We've got Sea Battle by Ramtech, a game that I would have loved to have covered, but there's no real info, there's no video or emulation. But it's a Sea Battle type game that sounds similar to Tank, but with ships. There's moving mines this time and destructible terrain, which actually sounds pretty great, but
yeah, that's
unfortunately cool. Could not rate it. That's by Ramtech, and that also came out in
April.
April of 76. So we're moving into April now.
Yeah, I gotta write those the full month out, or else I realize how bad I don't really know my numbers of what month corresponds to what number. And so last we have, in case you thought we were done with Pong, more Pong. This is the Pong Doubles / the Sears Pong 4 console, which was the model C160 home version. And this, instead of doing 4 games like Super Pong, just played Pong Doubles. The Atari version was never released, so there's not really much info on it today, but the Sears version probably actually came out before the C140 model that we just talked about.
Right. So the Sears version had a different number than the Atari version, which was the C160, even though the C160 was never released.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine what I was doing when I was trying to put these in order.
That's why, I mean, you gave me the information and I'm thankful, but I wasn't even saying those Sears model numbers because the Atari ones are so much easier to say and remember.
Yeah. The reason why this one's after Super Pong is the Atari number is bigger, right?
Right.
Later, even though the Sears number was smaller than the last one. So there's some weird stuff going on there, but we'll just assume it was about the same time.
Right. Yeah. Who knows? One released first, the other one didn't release, but it was intended to release later. Who knows?
Yeah. So I'm going to leave that there. And that's going to do it for us. I hope you guys enjoyed our 25th episode. Thank you for listening this whole time. Wes, I'm a little tired, but we've got some great games past us and some great games to go.
Yeah, yeah.
Why don't you guys check out our website to look at those games, because they're there.
And make sure to check us out on Twitter, tweet us, add us anything, and send us an email if you want to ask us any questions. We're so thankful to have people listening for 25 episodes of us talking about video games and the history of. And it's just been fun, and it's going to continue to be awesome to be recording all these.
Yeah, we've got I feel like every episode we do, the games get better and better, so it's even more fun to keep going, right. At this point. It's like all the worst stuff's behind us, Wes.
Yeah, Subnautica's ahead.
Yes, that's right. Battletoads is ahead.
There we go.
All right, we'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving, and hopefully this comes out before Christmas.
Get you guys next time.
See ya.